Namaskar, hello and welcome viewers. You're watching the special presentation of Sunset TV, Bills and Insight, your one-stop destination for views, news and analysis of proposed legislations of India that have far-reaching implications and impact your life. I'm your host, Kruti Mishra, and today the spotlight is on the Indian Antarctic Bill 2022. The government has introduced this bill almost 40 years since India first joined the Antarctica Pact. Before the detailed analysis, let's take a look at the highlights of the bill. The bill provides for a harmonious policy framework for India's Antarctica activities. The bill has listed strict guidelines and a system of permits which will be issued by a government-appointed committee, without which any expedition or individual will not be allowed to enter Antarctica. The bill seeks to protect the Antarctica environment and regulate activities in the region. So why did we need this bill? Well, Antarctica is Earth's southernmost continent. It contains the geographic South Pole and it is situated in the Antarctica region of the Southern Hemisphere. India has been a signatory to the Antarctica Treaty since 1983, and that encumbered India to specify a set of laws governing portions of the continent where it had its research bases. In fact, the treaty made it mandatory for the 54 signatory countries to specify laws governing territories on which their stations are located. India is also a signatory to treaties such as Convention on the Conservation of Antarctica Marine Living Resources and the Commission for Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. Both the conventions enjoin India to help preserve the pristine nature of the continent. This bill is the first domestic legislation with regard to Antarctica in India. While India has been sending expeditions to Antarctica for the last 40 years, these expeditions have been circumscribed by international laws. And for deeper understanding of the bill and the Antarctica Treaty, I'm joined by an esteemed panel of guests. Joining us through virtual platform, Mr. M. Rajivan, former Secretary, Ministry of Earth Sciences, Mr. Gurjeet Singh, former Ambassador, and also joining us, Dr. Jitendra Veer Sharma, Senior Director, Land Resources, TERI. And joining us in the studio, young professionals and students. And Mr. Rajivan, let me begin the program with you. India maintains 2 research stations on the continent, Maitri and Bharti. It has also launched 41 scientific expeditions every year thus far. Together with Himadri Station in Svalbard, above the Arctic Circle, India is among an elite group of countries with multiple research in the polar regions. In that context, take us through the importance of this bill, sir.
That is true. India, Ministry of Earth Science has been doing this kind of expeditions both to Antarctic as well as Arctic for many years. Our Antarctica program is started in 1983. At that time, very few countries have been going to Antarctica at that time. So at that time, the government took a decision to send scientific expeditions to Antarctica. Since then, without any interruptions, any particular year, even during this COVID time, we had a lot of difficulties of sending people, but still Ministry of Earth Science could send that expeditions. And we have been collecting, we have been sending people from different institutions, not only the scientists from Ministry of Earth Sciences, but different kinds of institutions, and also different fields of expertise. Not only geoscience, atmospheric science, life sciences, and many different kinds of sciences we have been involving. And we have been collecting a lot of information and data, and we have published plenty of research papers. So in Antarctica research, we are one of the leading country in terms of number of publications and quality of publications, etc. And we are very fortunate that the government has been supporting us for the investment. For example, it needs a lot of money. For example, we have to hire a ship. Normal ship is not allowed to go there. We cannot go there because we need a special kind of ship which has to cut the ice. And then people have to stay there almost 1.5 years during the crucial winter period, which is very harsh in terms of living. And but still, we could do a lot of wonderful work on research in Antarctica.
All right, Ambassador Singh, coming to you now. Antarctica is remote, hostile. More countries now have substantive interests in the continent than the original 12. Some global resources are becoming scarce, especially oil. Why do so many nations want a piece of Antarctica? What is its strategic significance?
Everybody wanted a piece of Antarctica because they had an opportunity to grab it. I don't think when the first 6 or 7 nations made claims to Antarctica that they had any clear idea what lies over there. It was simply the land grab that those kind of countries were used to. Some of them were nowhere near Antarctica, not even in the southern hemisphere. But when the Antarctica Treaty was first signed by 12 nations, these original contracting parties who made these claims were brought within that treaty and come to a harmonious conclusion that we should do this in unison. Subsequently, when India and other countries have joined, now we are a large number of countries. So the question arises, why now? Why is India doing this now? To my mind, it is because first, as the former secretary explained, India has a consistent record of research in Antarctica. We have had 3 bases there. First base, Dakshin Gangotri, was ultimately lost after it lived its life. Subsequently, we have 2 other bases, 3,000 kilometers apart. We have a confirmed presence over there. We are a leading world power where scientific research is concerned. We today want to be seen clearly as a responsible power. And as a responsible power, the obligations that we undertook 40 years ago under the Antarctica Treaty meant that we would need to have domestic legislation to control our citizens, our activities, our tourists when they go there. I think that is what we are trying to do. And finally, I think you will see in the last 5 years or so, India's public commitment to the climate agenda is now at a high. Today, we are not a little boy sitting in the corner with everybody pointing fingers at you. Today, you are a responsible climate power of the world.
All right, Dr. Sharma, let's also talk about the environmental aspect. Now, this bill has provision to establish a committee on Antarctic governance and environmental protection to monitor, implement and ensure compliance with the relevant international laws, emission standards and rules of protection. A 100-kilometer long body of ice in Antarctica, which has been experiencing rapid melting, was formally named Glasgow after the Glasgow Climate Summit. Now, Antarctica science has also revealed much about the impact of human activity on the natural world. How do we preserve the pristine nature of the continent?
You have rightly mentioned that there is a rise of temperature from the pre-industrial baseline, and more than 1% has already been risen, and every global community, whole globe is trying to limit the rise of temperature within 2 degrees by 2100. I think it is a rise of temperature 2 degrees is inevitable, and what I am observing and seeing, the target have been taken up by the different countries called nationally determined contribution to limit the rise of temperature 2 degree within 2 degree. I, as a scientist, as a researcher, I found it is very, very difficult task. I am coming to the, then it is a great, very important effort of the government of India to come up with a bill to protect the environment and habitat of the Antarctica. There is a microorganism living over there. There is a other flora and fauna are living over there, and melting of the ice is impacting the habitat of the flora and fauna over there. There are many chances of enhancing the tourism through air or through vessels to the Antarctica, definitely to maintain the sustainability of the tourism. Tourism is important. To maintain the sustainability of tourism, this bill will definitely going to be maintained. The committee framed under this legislation definitely going to maintain the sustainability. Likewise, other countries must also come up with a kind of the legislation within their own country from where the tourists and other scientists are going over there, how to even human population is there, in scientists are there, tourists are there, then how to dispose the how to do the waste management.
Absolutely.
How to have the protect the, not only to maintain the ecosystem and climate of the Antarctica, even rest of the world has to maintain the global warming within the limit. And it is very key and important not only to limit the tourism and the influx of the people in whether scientists or other in other form, but maintain the ecosystem of the Antarctica to mitigate the climate
Right,
change
sir.
and to reduce the global warming, to reduce the emission and offsetting of the emission through forest and tree cover, as well as efficiency. And efficiency is very key and important, and we have to take these two aspects into consideration. Not only alone, this bill will not going to be save the Antarctica, but rest of the world also.
Right, sir. Right, sir. It's about the entire globe, and it's, of course, about the larger concern about climate change. But, Mr. Rajivan, as Dr. Sharma was pointing out about tourism, now this particular bill also provides for Indian tour operators to be able to operate in Antarctica after acquiring a permit. There are 40 permanent research stations in Antarctica, and Antarctica's biggest industry is tourism, with over 56,000 visitors per year, some 10,000 of them who will only cruise or fly without setting foot on land. How do we promote responsible tourism in the region, sir?
We have been mainly focusing on visiting these two research stations and doing scientific experiments. But I know that many of the tour operators are operating tourism and tours, especially from South Africa, South American side, like Argentina, etc. And there is a scope for Indian tour operators also to operate. But we have to be very careful, because this bill is exclusively meant for two purposes. One is, of course, it's obligatory in terms of we are a party to the Antarctica Treaty. We have voting rights there, so it's a mandatory. And many other countries which has voting rights have already made this Antarctica bill. So we are behind, and we are at the high time that we bring out this bill at the earliest. And another obligation is in terms of environment. So we have to protect the Antarctica environment because it's a very pristine area. And also, unfortunately, this Antarctica land is not owned by any country. And nobody has any right. So then anybody can come and do any mistakes or environment violations and kind of a degradation. They can do it in some terms of their activity. So we have to be very careful. So as far as Indian citizens are concerned, if somebody is going there and if he is violating some rules, there are a lot of strict rules in Antarctica in terms of environment as well as other resources, etc. And so we have to protect this. So this Antarctica bill, which we are bringing out, will really protect us in terms of environment protection of Antarctica also. At the same time, encouraging people from Indian tourists to go there and see and come back. And so we have to be a little more responsible in terms of kind of participant in the Antarctica Treaty.
Ambassador Singh, the 1959 Antarctic Treaty celebrated its 60th anniversary recently. Negotiated during the middle of the Cold War by 12 countries with Antarctic interests, it remains the only example of a single treaty that governs the entire continent. It is also the foundation of a rules-based international order for a continent without a permanent population. However, since the treaty was negotiated in a very different era, and there have been a number of environmental, resource and geopolitical disputes related to Antarctica in recent decades. For example, Argentina and the UK, they have overlapping claims on the territory. So what's the way ahead, sir?
Yes, it was indeed an instrument negotiated at difficult times. But it has an open-endedness about it. At 30 years, it could have been reviewed, but no signatory wanted to review it. So the treaty, despite 60 years, actually continues as it was. Now, to that treaty have been added additional and parallel instruments, at least half a dozen of them, which impact the use of resources in Antarctica and your conduct. Now, despite what our other panelists said, 10 people on Antarctica make a difference. 5,000 make a big difference to its sustainability. Scientific research or no scientific. Now, if you compare the Arctic and the Antarctic, you will see that the North Pole actually is a little bit of sea surrounded by land, whereas the South Pole in Antarctica is a large tract of land the sea about 2,500 kilometers away. Further, while the North Pole keeps shifting around in the sea and there is no pegged amount, in the South Pole, there is actually a peg which moves about 10 meters, everything. I think every year they shift it among the base stations to say, okay, this is the new South Pole. It's a very interesting ecology.
Yes.
But coming back to the larger question, why did we not declare Antarctica a common heritage of mankind?
Absolutely.
This concept exists. This concept has existed from the 1950s. And the first time the concept came in was when we discussed the Treaty on Outer Space in 1967. Yes. But the concept was only mentioned in 1982 when the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was mentioned, where all seas beyond the territorial water and the EEZ are the common heritage of mankind, which, my mind, includes Antarctica, because it is nobody's land. And finally, when we had the Treaty on the Moon in 1991, again, the concept was used, but the words were not. So this common heritage of man is an inclusive and exclusive one, meaning yes, it is not anybody's land. All must maintain it as per the rules, and we don't allow its exploitation, as you said, for resources or whatever, for anybody's individual benefit. Antarctica is a scientific land and should be maintained so. In order to give it some financial sustainability, I think some tourism should be allowed, but it requires very clear conduct over there. And as our colleagues have mentioned, pollution, the waste disposal, I think our bill carefully goes into all our responsibilities under the Antarctic Treaty.
Absolutely. And also, it is the responsibility of all the nations to preserve the pristine nature of the continent. On that note, let's take some questions from our audience.
In order to conserve marine life, flights from India have been prohibited to fly over Antarctica, but some flights from New Zealand and South Africa continue to do so. Why aren't these flights also being prohibited to fly over Antarctica in order to conserve the marine life?
All right, let's take that to Dr. Sharma. Dr. Sharma, what about the pollution caused by aviation activities of different countries other than India?
Aviation industry do emit the emissions, and whenever we take the boarding pass and when book the tickets, the kind of emission we are going to incur, that is very well written. When passing through the Antarctica or over the sea, the emission part is enhanced. There is not other impacts on the ecosystem of the Antarctica. Likewise, so as far as the impact on the marine life is concerned, or when flying over the 10,000 feet or 20,000 feet over the sky, I think it is not going to accept the emission aspect.
As we know, India signed Antarctic Treaty 40 years ago. But why it take 40 years for this bill?
Mr. Rajivan, why did we take so long for this bill?
But the concept of this Antarctica bill has not started when we signed it. At that time, it was not there. I think it started very late. I think, but still, I will confess that we are very late in bringing out this bill. As I told that many other Antarctica Treaty countries have already brought that bill in their respective countries. We are late, but we are not late by 40 years. I think I don't remember when this whole concept of Antarctica bill has started. But at least from my side, from our Indian side, we know that, for example, in 2015, when I joined the Ministry of Health Sciences Secretary, the bill first draft was ready. But it took a lot of time. Of course, COVID also has really troubled us. But it took a lot of time because there's a lot of consultation was required with other ministry stakeholders and public, as well as the law ministry. And it took a lot of time. But definitely we are not late by 40 years.
What are the political, social and economic effects of this bill that we can expect to see or observe in our India?
Ambassador Singh, would you like to take that one?
Well, the question is so broad, I don't know what the answer is. So typically, this is what's called a good question. It stumps the panelist, doesn't know what to say. But yes, I think I would say that this bill is a preventive bill. Not do this, not do that, not do that, and basically abide by our responsibilities of the Antarctic Treaty. As I think Mr. Rajivan said, that there is not that much beyond scientific research that we were doing there. We were not really flying planes there, upsetting the apple cart or killing local microbes. So we are not violating, but we are taking this action preventively to make sure that we stay aligned with our responsibilities and show responsibility to the climate agenda. What economic impact, political impact, social impact, I think this is far in the future. But I really hope that what we did to the Arctic, we don't do to the Antarctic.
In this law, there is a provision to establish the separate courts for to resolve these issues, like in Antarctica related. How it is implemented on Indian as well as foreigner citizens.
What are the positive changes that this bill will bring?
So I think the positive change is that you will get a special court along with the bill. Normally in India, you have many bills and then you have the normal courts to go to, and sometimes they set up special courts. But here, this is so important that we don't want the climate agenda to be violated, that we are bringing a special court along with the bill, so that in case there are any violations, they should hopefully be punished in quick time. But again, as I said, both these ideas are futuristic ideas. If anybody is going to get hauled up in the beginning, it's only people from the Earth Science Ministry, because they're the only ones there right now. And I don't think they are irresponsible people. So I think overall, we are not, this is not an Indus Waters Treaty that you are judging how Indus Waters will be shared today, tomorrow, day after. This is a futuristic treaty essentially based on science and research. So you can ask, how will that research benefit me? That is something Mr. Rajivan has to answer. Because the research is actually quite anodyne. It is not India-specific research. It is making India a world power in research. That is what it will do. It is not bringing direct benefits of the research to India. So I will leave that over there.
Dr. Sharma, you want to make a point?
Yes. I wanted to make a point over here, that is a suggestion to the Ministry of Earth Sciences to. I have gone through the bill, and because climate change agenda is so important to save the ecosystem and habitat of the Antarctica. So that there is a need to have a clause regarding as far as India is concerned, to maintain its climate agenda on top, and for the sake of maintaining the ecosystem and habitat of the Antarctica.
Right, sir. Right.
You can't do that. I'm sorry. You can't do that, because this bill is specifically to implement our Antarctic Treaty obligations. The climate agenda, we have not undertaken treaty obligations. You cannot.
Mr. Rajivan, would you like to add a perspective to that?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. One is, as Mr. Gurjit Singh rightly told, this is just to support the Antarctica Treaty. The climate agenda will not come directly, actually, but to protect the Antarctica environment, this bill is very much required. And the second thing is, as far as science is concerned, Antarctica is very dear to us in terms of scientific objectives. You may not, many of you may not be knowing that 50 million years ago, we were in Antarctica. So the whole continents of India, South Africa, and Australia, they are all together with Antarctica. Then continents got drifted, and our Indian subcontinent started moving northwards. Then it started colliding with the Eurasian continent. Then Himalayas came up, monsoon. So we are basically, our origin is from Antarctica. So we have a lot of affection for Antarctica. And our researchers do a lot of work on paleoclimatology. What was the climate in Antarctica a few years back? And second important aspect we study is the origin of carbon dioxide. For example, ice cores, in Antarctica ice cores, the carbon molecules are trapped. And if you take it out and see how carbon dioxide concentration was about, for example, 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago. And the most important discovery from Antarctica was the ozone hole discovery. 1985, ozone hole was discovered. So Antarctica, in many aspects, scientifically, it is very challenging and very attractive. So
absolutely, sir. Absolutely. I'm completely out of time on the show, sir. And as we know, the bill puts into place a comprehensive list of regulations related to Antarctica for such scientific expeditions, as well as for individuals, companies, and tourists. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Rajivan, Ambassador Singh and Dr. Sharma. Next week, we'll return with incisive analysis of another important bill. Till then, take care and stay tuned to Sunset TV. Namaskar.